Hey, heartfelt good evening to everyone out there. Nice to see everyone again. It's been actually a bit longer than it normally is. I apologize for that. My name again is Andrew Sindler. I want to welcome you back to my YouTube channel for the latest installment. Um, it's been a busy summer. Technically, it is still summer, but we're pretty much at the end with school having started and we're past Labor Day now. Between summer break, vacation, and unexpected illness that wasn't COVID, but probably just as bad, that sidelined me for a bit of time. As I said, this took me a little bit longer than I was anticipating getting it together, but I appreciate everyone always hanging in there with me. It's been great. A lot of the feedback I've been getting from so many people, people that I currently represent, people that I am due soon to represent, people that reach out to me randomly. It's really just very endearing to know that these videos are actually making a difference in helping people. I know I certainly see regularly that the number of views of these videos is increasing at a regular rate. I'm getting new subscribers, which is not what I set out to do. The purpose of this channel is and always has been just to educate people and help bring them up to the level of understanding a lot better how the process works. So I'm really, really glad that I've been able to continue doing that and helping enrich people with understanding what this vast ocean and minefield that is known as Social Security disability consists of and how to navigate it. So glad to continue doing this as long as I'm able to, as long as there's going to be needs and topics that come up or topics that I feel are relevant. I'm going to heartily share them with you. So without further ado, tonight's video actually shouldn't be too long. This one's going to have a similar structure and feel to one that I did previously. That's probably arguably my most popular one gets viewed most frequently, which is the one I did on function reports. This is another form that gets done pretty much at the same time as the function report. Doesn't get as much attention, but it's becoming more important now. And after tonight's video, you're going to understand why. So I have my normal PowerPoint slideshow that I will include with it, but I also am going to toggle away from that at one point to a specific website and form specifically, I should say, to help everyone understand that a bit better as well. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's topic. Let me do my screen share first. Okay, let's get the slideshow underway. All right, tonight's topic, work history reports. And this is updated. If I had done this just a few months ago, this presentation would have been a bit different than what you're actually going to see, but you'll still find it equally as important and probably in some ways more important. As always, my About Me slide, I always like to change the formatting every time to keep it a little interesting and fresh. My website, contact information, of course, you found my YouTube channel, information about my background and practice, and all the good stuff. Everything here still rings true just as much as it did on the very first video we ever did. I'm going to try to adjust a little bit of the backlight here. I feel like I'm lit a little too bright tonight. There we go. That should be a little better. All right. So we're talking about work history report forms, which again, pretty much work in tandem with function report forms, and they get sent out at the same time and they get handled at the same time. But let's first, before we can delve into the work history report form, we have to understand a little bit more about the relevance of that form, and more specifically, we have to understand the concept of past relevant work, which I have talked about on a number of my prior videos, including, I believe it was the most recent one I did, where I indicated about the rule change that went into effect, but I'm going to go into a little more detail for tonight. So past relevant work is, as some of you may know, the step 4 of 5 of the 5-step sequential evaluation process. So the official definition, and this is just so I'm giving it a proper citation here under the Code of Federal Regulations, past relevant work is work that has, one, been performed within the relevant period, which is the recency test, And that's the main component of where the rule changed on June 22nd. So now past relevant work is considered to be work performed within the last 5 years. Now, specifically, the 5-year period doesn't count necessarily from the present time. The 5-year period counts either from the alleged onset date of when you allege that you became disabled, which is one of the first things you note when you file a claim for benefits, or for Title II SSDI benefits from your date last insured if that date is already in the past. And if your alleged onset date is right around that same time. So basically, whichever one goes back further, that's the one that they're going to go with. Oftentimes, it's going to be the alleged onset date, but sometimes it can end up being that date last insured as well. But again, you're going to count backwards 5 years from that date. Now, for most people, when they're filing, their alleged onset date is pretty close in time to when they applied for benefits. So it's okay to generally look at it for all intents and purposes of basically the last 5 years from wherever you're at in time. As I stated before, the original rule used to call for the last 15 years, which was a very, very convoluted way of doing things. As anyone who's seen my previous video on the grid rules understands, it was a much easier route for Social Security to deny claims on technicalities, essentially where somebody who may have performed a job literally 15 years ago for a short period of time, but long enough to count as past relevant work, could actually be denied on a claim when Social Security could come in and say, well, you're capable of doing your past relevant work that you happen to have done 15 years ago. Well, Social Security finally came to their senses a little bit, certainly under our new commissioner, Martin O'Malley, who's just swept through with some amazing changes that have been really beneficial for claimants and claimants' representatives. So we're greatly appreciative of that. But basically came to recognize that 5 years really should be the benchmark. For one thing, most people, if they have an extensive work history, don't remember beyond the past 5 years. So how can they be expected to remember how to do a certain type of work within the last 5 years or 15 years rather than let alone just remembering what the job was or where you worked. I mean, we all keep resumes typically, but even still, I don't remember the details of work I did 15 years ago when I was last working at a law firm. So that just goes to show you. It was in the same line of work, but I couldn't tell you any details. So it was an amazing change that was implemented, and it is benefiting people greatly. And tonight's video is really going to speak to what you can do to take advantage of that new benefit. Past relevant work is also work that was not started and stopped in fewer than 30 calendar days. So the 30 calendar days test is important too, because if you did a job within the 5-year period, but you didn't do it for at least 30 calendar days, it doesn't count because you didn't do it long enough. So you don't have to worry about listing a job that you had a really short stint and stopped it as quickly as you started it. Also, again, has to have lasted long enough for the claimant to learn to do it, long enough to learn. Now, the 30-day benchmark is the bare minimum, but even if you did a job for more than 30 days, that doesn't automatically mean you learned how to do it. If it's a really complex job, a skilled type of job particularly, that requires more than 30 days to learn how to do, but you still didn't do it for the length of time that it typically is prescribed for you to learn it, then by all means, it's not going to be considered past relevant work there either. And last and most important, the past relevant work has to have been substantial gainful activity, which is measured, as I've talked about in prior videos, by the total monthly earnings pre-tax. So the SGA amount for 2024 is $1,550 a month. So if you are looking at work you did within 2024 and you earned at least $1,550 a month or more pre-tax, particularly if you average it out over time, then that will be considered past relevant work. If you didn't earn that much, it will not. So again, why is past relevant work relevant? The key word in that. Well, it's relevant because, again, it can lead to a denial at step 4 of 5 of the sequential evaluation process. So see my video again on the ABCs of SSD, the very first one I ever did last August. and it can prevent direct application of the grids. Please see my grid rules video if you haven't seen that one. So that's the reason why it's so important and why it's important for us to do right by this work history report form that we're going to talk about. So the work history reports, let me try to clear that out of the way so it isn't in our way. Okay, screen giving me a fit here. All right, wait a minute. Let me see if I can move it down. There we go, just for now. Work history reports. What are they and why they can be the difference? And I'm giving credit to myself because what you're going to see on this slide is in many ways a carbon copy of what I did in the function report PowerPoint slideshow on that video. So there's a little tongue-in-cheek reference because you're supposed to give credit and properly cite to what you're referencing. I'm citing to myself, so I'm not plagiarizing myself, but just trying to find the humor in the situation. Okay, so this is basically, you don't have to copy all of this part, but right here, if you copy in from the HTTPS portion, that is the link to the PDF form. It's form SSA 3369. That's the work history report form. It's the required form that has to be completed by the claimant after the initial application is filed, as well as at the reconsideration appeal stage. Even if the claimant is represented, this form has to be completed by him or her directly, but again, an attorney can and certainly should be assisting you to help you tweak it. Lord knows I've been doing that a lot more with my clients, especially with these changes. And again, it can be the difference between an approved or denied claim, and it can also set up grounds for an appeal in the future. All right, so the work history report form, what's in it? Well, now we're going to take a quick break from here, and we're going to actually explore the form. So I'm going to, bear with me, I'm going to do a different screen share this time. I believe, let me see, let me get to the right screen. It'll take me a second. I apologize if you can all bear with me here a minute. Just have to find where my web browser is, and that's when we can get right to it. Okay, so for reasons I can't explain, I don't see it coming up. So let me stop this share for a second. And hopefully that will get me to where I need to go. All right, so let's see if this will do it. All right, let's try another screen share. There we go. Okay, this should work. Okay, so this is pulled up right on the website. So I'm going to scroll. So this is the cover page. So the first couple pages you just skim right over. This is just instructions. This is what you'll see when you receive it in the mail, or if you're represented by an attorney. I know I always email an advance copy of this to my clients. All right, so let's start. This is page 3 of 14. Now, don't be overwhelmed because you're not necessarily going to be filling out even close to the whole amount of the 14 pages you see here. So basically, the first page is a summary page after you put your name, your social security number, and that might even be pre-filled when you receive it, but you put your phone number in. So right here, you're going to list all the jobs you had in the 5 years, again, before you became unable to work, which is basically the 5 years before your alleged onset date. And you go in reverse chronological order. You start most recent and you go backwards. So again, just like the definition, you don't include jobs that you held less than 30 calendar days. You list all job titles, even if they were for the same employer. Now, you can potentially list them on the same line if you have that many to list. And if you run out of room, there's a remarks section at the end that you can include. You do also include self-employment, and you also include work in a foreign country. That rarely ever applies to any of my clients, but it can. So basically, on each line, you put the job title, and it gives you an example, so you know. And you need to make sure you're actually writing your job title. I've had people mistakenly write the name of the business they work for, or I've had people write just what type of business it was, which is the second column. So you want to make sure you differentiate those. And then for dates you worked, you're going to put just the month and the year. And if you can't remember accurately, just you make your best guess. That's what you do with that. All right. Now, once you've filled this part in, section 2 is basically a more detailed breakdown of each job title you list. So for each one you list here that falls within the 5-year period of past relevant work, you're going to fill out the same information for each. So it consists of 2 more pages for each job title. So on this first page, which is page 4 of 14 of the form, you'll see you'll put that job title number 1 here. You indicate your rate of pay, and if it was full-time work, you put that. If it's part-time, you put how many hours per day and days per week. So the questions are in general self-explanatory, but there are different things about them that are very important. And when I come back to the PowerPoint, you're going to understand some specifics of what it is that you need to be doing and not doing on some of these questions. So just to quickly browse through them, for the job you listed, blah, 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 describe in detail the tasks you did in a typical workday. And they give you examples, but that's not an all-inclusive list. If any of the tasks involved writing or completing reports, describe the type of report you wrote or completed. So again, that's fairly self-explanatory. If any of the tasks listed above involve supervising others, describe who or what you supervised and what the supervisor duties were. List the machines, tools, and equipment you use regularly when doing this job. Did this job require you to interact with coworkers, general public, or anyone else? If the answer is yes, you give a description of that. So that's the first page, the first part of it. Second part is a bit of a breakdown on, for the most part, the physical duties and demands of the job. So it asks you for each of the activities you see listed in this far left column: standing and walking combined, sitting, stooping, kneeling, crouching, crawling, etc. If you did it, how much of the workday did you do it? Hours and minutes. So basically, you're going to list that out here. Now, I'm just going to give you an advance heads up because I'm going to discuss this when we get back to the PowerPoint on one of the coming slides. It does say here the total hours / minutes for standing, walking, and sitting should equal the hours per day. I wholeheartedly disagree with that, and I'm going to explain why when we get to that slide. So despite it saying that, you're not actually going to do that. And again, you're going to understand why when I come to that slide. So you're going to go through all this. Then there's a section for lifting and carrying. You're going to explain what you lifted and carried, how far you did it, how often you did it, and then both the heaviest weight and the weight you frequently lifted. I'm going to go over all that in more detail. And then it'll ask you if the job exposed you to any of the following. And you see all these check marks here for just specific examples. And you explain it if you do check off any of these boxes. Now, interestingly, this form, when the new rule went into effect a few months ago, this form was updated right along with it, and it was vastly in need of a revamping. So it was good that that actually happened, because the old version of the form, which I'm obviously not going to go over since it no longer is in effect, was much more condensed, did not go into the level of detail this one did, which is more beneficial than not. But most important of all, it did not give claimants an opportunity to do what the final question on this section asks, which is explain how your medical conditions would affect your ability to do this job. I'm going to go over in more detail why that's so significant and why that's so powerful when I get back to the slideshow, but you never used to have that opportunity, and now you do, and it's huge, and it's something to absolutely take advantage of. Now, just scrolling a tiny bit further, you'll see that section 2 repeats again, and you can see here it's now indicating job title number 2 if you have a job title number 2. You keep scrolling, you'll see it. There's number 3, and I think it goes on for at least 5 jobs. Yeah, so get through all that, and then when you get to the final page, page 14 of 14, you have an optional remarks section. Pretty much if you can't fit everything on the prior pages and you need to add it in here or attach extra sheets. And then just basically date the reports completed. If you completed it, you just check the box of the person listed in 1A, which is on the first page of it, and then that's it. But if somebody else completed it, whether it's an attorney or a family member or friend, you put their information here and how they're related to you, and then that's that. So that is the work history report form. Now let's get back to the slideshow so we can pick up where we left off. All right. So first, let's talk about some general guidelines. And once again, I'm jokingly giving credit to myself because this, in some ways, is a little bit of a copy and paste from the function report slideshow, but again, a little different. Just like with the function report, you never want to take the easy way out on this. You want to put in the time and effort to fill it out completely and include specific details and examples when and where you can and when and where you should, because you don't always want to do that, which I'll explain momentarily. Where appropriate, you want to take the time to explain and elaborate, even if the question doesn't specifically ask you to do so. So that's more so for the function report, but in some ways it could apply here too. You want to highlight the tasks or requirements of the work that you clearly can't do anymore, and that your medical evidence will clearly support that you can't do, both physically and or mentally. So basically, if there's a component of the work that involves doing something that you know for 100% certain you can't do anymore. So if it's a job that was very physically demanding, required a lot of heavy weightlifting, and required a lot of standing and walking and physical labor activities, but you know your current conditions are so physically debilitating in nature that you're relegated to sitting all day and not doing any heavy lifting, if that, then you want to highlight the parts that you know you clearly are going to be not capable of doing, so that there's no doubt about it. Now, more specific guidelines. So just like I did with the function report, I'm going to break this down a little bit more. And I'm not going to be able to toggle back and forth between the form itself. So you can look at it for comparison at your leisure. If for most people, when you come to watching this, you're going to end up having the form already at your disposal. So like anybody, if you're an existing client of mine and I've directed you to this, you're already going to have the form in hand. So you're going to be able to reference it as I'm going over this. Okay, so page 1 of 2 for the specifics of each job title. You want to be extra careful on this because in some ways you want to not be too specific or detailed on the job tasks that can become or can be conceived as, quote, skills that could later be determined to be transferable skills, and again, prevent a grid rule from being applied at step 4 or 5. And again, if you haven't watched it and it applies to you, please reference my grid rules video to understand exactly how that works and what I mean by that without me having to go into it now. But on the other hand, if you clearly can no longer do skilled work anymore, it can actually be useful to classify the work as skilled so that you can't be denied at step 4 or 5, particularly if a grid rule could apply to render you disabled. And what I mean by that essentially is this. If you have past work that you need to get over the hump of proving that you can't do your past work anymore, in order to, number one, not be denied at step 4, but also number 2, to potentially apply a grid rule if you're in one of the higher age categories. If your past work is potentially capable of being classified as unskilled work, then you may have a more challenging time proving you can no longer do it. Because skilled work, if you have limitations that prevent you from doing skilled work, it's easier to make the argument that you can no longer do skilled work. But if you were already doing unskilled work in the first place, then the only hope you have is to prove that the physical demands of the work, assuming it was a physically demanding job, you're no longer capable of doing. And if that's the case, then you don't have to worry about this as much. But again, if you have a past job that could possibly be classified as unskilled work, even though it probably wasn't, you want to make sure you're highlighting the skills, number one, to show that you can't do them anymore. And number 2, to make sure it gets classified that way so that there's no chance they're going to come back and be able to use it against you in that fashion. You also want to be clear on whether you were actually, and this is again on the first page of the form, whether you were actually, quote, supervising others. I tell my clients this all the time. There is a vast difference between being fully in charge of others, which includes the decision to hire and fire other people, which is supervising in its truest sense, versus just overseeing people from a distance and perhaps occasionally giving them a nudge. Um, you may even have people that technically work under you or may even report to you a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are supervising them in the capacity that that question implies. So again, it comes back to the first bullet point. If you're not actually supervising, you don't want to make it out like you are, because that could turn what is essentially unskilled work into skilled work. And that could also lead to an issue of trying to claim there's a transferable skill somewhere mixed in there. So you just want to be a little cautious about that. For the section that asks you to list tools or machinery that you used, you want to only list tools and machinery that are specific to that job or line of work, and not ones that can span across other jobs or lines of work, like computers or phones, for example. We all know that most, if not all, jobs require some use of computers and phones. So we don't need to list that, number one, because it's common knowledge in many instances. And number two, we just don't want to highlight stuff like that. Again, it could raise the work to a level where it could be considered skilled and transferable skilled work. And that's what you want to try to avoid, so you don't run into the problem of a grid denial or step 4 denial. So you want to be mindful of that. And then for interacting with others, again, you want to make sure you specify how much interaction was required, particularly if you can no longer interact as well or as often due to your impairments. Now, forgive my typo there. Most of the time, if you have mental health impairments, that's where you're going to be impacted on your ability to interact with other people. If you have like an anxiety or a depression or a PTSD, or you have panic attacks or things like that, it's going to be difficult to be around other people. But if you were previously working a job where you did that, then you want to make sure you're specifying how much you were doing that, again, so you could avoid any potential pitfall of them trying to come in and say you're no longer capable, or that you are capable of doing past work that you know you're not. And just as a little sidebar note, don't ever let anyone convince you that people skills are skills. They're not. So the fact that you were able to interact with other people, coworkers, supervisors, or the general public, customers, whatever it is, in a prior job, does not mean that's a transferable skill. The relevance here is, again, if you have the limitations that would prevent you from doing it, and you were previously doing it in another job. That's what it comes down to. Because if you were working a job where you really weren't interacting with other people, then that's going to be irrelevant anyway, but just something to take note of. All right, more specific guidelines. Now we're on to page 2 of 2 for the specifics. So again, the specifics of each job title. So as I referenced when we were looking at the form before, for how much time you spent doing each activity, which includes that whole thing about sitting, standing, and walking should equal the total number of hours in a day. You want to make sure, I cannot emphasize this enough, that you list the maximum amount of time you would do any of those activities on any given day, particularly the physically demanding ones. So even if you have a job that might ultimately be classified as sedentary work, if you could have days where you could be on your feet long periods of time, or doing those kind of physical activities like the postural movements of stooping and kneeling and stuff like that, you absolutely want to make sure that you're saying the maximum amount on any given day. Even if it was once in a blue moon, that's still relevant. And again, even if that's not the average or the norm, you still want to make sure you're listing the highest amount. Along the same lines, equally as important, if the job generally required whatever the maximum amount is of standing, walking, or any of those things that you list, but for you individually, you were accommodated by the employer and didn't necessarily have to do that, even though the job calls for it and requires it, you want to still make sure you list what the job actually required, not what you actually did. Because again, there's a vast difference between a job not requiring a certain amount of standing and walking, let's say, versus an employer that says, I'm going to make the exception for you. Because if you put that exception down, then you can bet the farm Social Security is going to misclassify your work as something other than what it is. So if it's actually light or medium or heavy work, but you were performing it at a sedentary level, they're going to find it to be a sedentary job, which is, again, going to make a tougher argument for you to say you can no longer do that work at step 4, and then preventing you from applying a grid rule if you're of the right age. So that's how you want to approach that. For each of those activities, what's the most amount I could have ever done on any given day, or that I did do on any given day, and that the job required. For lifting and carrying, same exact concept as above. You want to list the heaviest weight you would occasionally and frequently lift, and what the job required, not just what you did if you were accommodated. So if the job normally requires you to lift anywhere from 20 to 50 pounds, but your boss said, well, I know you got a bad back, so I'm not going to make you do that. I'm going to have somebody else do it. Still list the amount that you would normally be required to, and perhaps you at one point were lifting, not what somebody else was doing for you. Because again, you don't want them to misclassify the work. And again, don't gloss over the section of what you were exposed to during the work. I've seen a lot of my clients who did jobs that I know exposed them to things like extreme cold or extreme heat, whether it was temperature related or not, outdoors, humidity. And even if it was a very random and minimal exposure, it's still an exposure. So it still needs to be noted, especially if you have the type of limitations that would prevent you from being able to do the kind of work that would expose you to that, even for a brief period of time. For example, if you have a respiratory ailment like asthma or COPD or emphysema, it's going to be really difficult for you to do a job that requires you, even for just a tiny portion of any given day, not even every day, to be outside in extreme weather. It's just not going to be possible. So you want to make sure you're noting that as well. And then for the final question on the form, which again is new on this current form, golden perfect opportunity to explain in your own words why you can no longer do that specific job or work. But, and this is another thing I've been telling my clients left, right, and center, it's also brilliant to be able to use it as a platform to kind of create. This is something I come back to all the time, that concept of consistency and a theme throughout the entire pendency of your claim. From day one, you need a consistent theme. And the theme of your claim is why you cannot work any job, not just that one specific job. So use that section to not only indicate why you can't do that work, but make it pretty universal. Make them understand why the type of limitations you have are going to transcend not just your job or jobs that you did, but any types of jobs, that no employer on the face of the earth is going to be able to hire you with those types of limitations. And again, if you need extra room, use that remarks section at the end to add more of that in, like really pummel that point home. Your function report's going to do a lot of that by itself already, but a form that gives you an extra opportunity to really bludgeon them to death with that consistent theme of here's why I'm disabled, here's why I can't work. Take full advantage of that, because the more you have it documented, the harder it's going to be for them to say you're being inconsistent and you're not credible as the claim continues on and on. Other relevant points and considerations. Again, just like with the function report, we don't want to give Social Security more ammunition than they need and already have to use against you. So take advantage of what you can do to advocate for yourself. And again, do not tell it like it's not, but also tell it like it is. Don't let them mischaracterize and misclassify your past work, especially if you have a job title that's not well known or a well accepted one. Because they won't hesitate to do it if it'll give them the opportunity to deny your claim at step 4. They would love to classify your work in a way that they know they can still say, giving you some benefit of the doubt about your impairments and limitations, that you're still capable of doing that work. Just don't let them take advantage that way. And as I've said before in other videos, and particularly with the function report, you don't have to show that you're an invalid or completely debilitated. But don't be a hero or a tough guy or gal either and pretend something isn't a big deal. If it's keeping you from working any full-time job consistently, it's a huge deal. But don't say you can do more than you can actually do to prevent a grid or convince them you can still do your past work. So, don't make it seem, especially in the section that's asking why you can no longer do whatever prior job you had, that you can't stand as long, but you can still do some standing. No, you want to make it clear you just can't do any long standing anymore, period. You don't want to get any more specific than that. You don't want to say, I can't lift 25 to 50 pounds. At most, I can only lift 20 pounds. You're still giving them some extra ammunition to work with. Just say, I can't lift anything heavy anymore. And you leave it like that. And as always, if there are any questions, phone and email are the best ways to contact me, and I'll respond to all calls and emails directly and promptly, generally the same day. Also, will respond to texts. And with that, and no further ado, that concludes tonight's video presentation on work history report forms. I hope you found it very helpful and useful, and I will see you for the next one.